Hello everyone. My name is Miriam and I am a designer. For years, my name was a secret, a ghost haunting an industry that had forgotten I ever existed. Tonight all of that is about to change. In a few minutes I'm going to walk out onto a catwalk in Milan, and in the front row holding the most coveted ticket in the fashion world, will be my former best friend Charlotte. She's the woman who built a global empire on my designs, took all the credit, and then threw me away like a broken needle when I finally asked for my name to be spoken aloud. She has spent a fortune to be here, desperate to meet the anonymous, celebrated designer known only as Silkworm. She has no idea she's about to come face to face with the woman whose life she stole. This isn't just the debut of a new collection. It's the end of a long, painful silence. It's the night I finally take my name back. Before I take you backstage into the beautiful, controlled chaos of this moment, before I reveal how a friendship forged in a tiny, cramped apartment ended in the most public, glittering betrayal imaginable, I'd love it if you'd let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in telling this story. And if you've ever felt like your voice was silenced or your work was overlooked, please hit that like button so I know this story resonates. And for anyone new here, make sure you subscribe because this channel is a place for stories just like this one. Stories about finding your strength when the world tries to take it from you. What would you do if your closest friend erased you from your own life story? Stick with me and I'll tell you exactly what I did. It all started, as so many epic stories do, in a place that was anything but epic. Our apartment in New York was laughably small, the kind of place where you could boil pasta on the stove while sitting on the edge of the bed. The air was a permanent mix of turpentine from my art supplies, cheap coffee, and the ambitious, electric scent of two 20-somethings who believed they could conquer the world. We were Miriam and Charlotte, Charlotte and Miriam. Our names were an incantation, a promise we made to each other and to the universe. We survived on instant noodles and bodega sandwiches, fueling ourselves with dreams that felt more real than the rumbling subway train beneath our floorboards. I was the quiet one, the girl who spoke through charcoal sticks and fabric shears. My world was my sketchbook, a worn, coffee-stained volume filled with the ghosts of dresses waiting to be born. I saw life in silhouettes, in the drape of a stranger's coat on the street, in the pleats of a discarded newspaper. I would draw for hours, lost in a world of my own making, while Charlotte, my Charlotte, handled the actual world. She was my perfect other half. Where I was quiet, she was a symphony. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a smile that could disarm the most cynical investor. She could talk a fabric supplier into giving us a discount, charm a skeptical boutique owner into taking our first few pieces on consignment, and spin our story of two girls with a dream into a compelling narrative that made people want to be a part of it. I was the heart, she was the voice. I was the architect, she was the diplomat. It felt perfect. It felt like we were invincible. Our first brand, our baby, was called C&M Designs. It was my insistence. It has to be both of us, I had said, tracing the ampersand between our initials. Always. She'd hugged me so tightly then, her chin resting on top of my head. Always, Miri. You and me against the world. And for a while it was. Our first success was a fluke, a beautiful, unexpected accident. I had designed a simple silk tea dress, inspired by a vintage photograph. It had a peculiar sleeve, one that billowed just so, like a captured breath. A low-level fashion blogger bought one from the tiny boutique that had taken a chance on us, wore it to an event and was photographed. The next day the boutique's phone was ringing off the hook. The C&M tea dress was a viral sensation before we even knew what that meant. That first taste of success was intoxicating. We moved out of the tiny apartment and into a slightly less tiny studio space. The instant noodles were replaced with takeout sushi we ate on the floor, surrounded by bolts of fabric and overflowing pattern paper. I was in heaven. My entire existence was dedicated to creation. I would work until my fingers were stiff and my eyes burned, falling asleep with the scent of silk and the hum of my sewing machine in my ears. I didn't want the spotlight. I craved the sanctuary of the studio. I was happy to let Charlotte be the face of our growing brand. She thrived on it. She would come back from meetings, her eyes sparkling, and recount every detail of how she'd charmed this editor or wowed that buyer. She'd hold up a new magazine feature and we'd squeal together, pointing at the tiny print that said C&M Designs. It felt like our victory, a shared triumph. The first crack in our foundation was so subtle I almost missed it. It was an interview in a major fashion magazine, a huge milestone for us. I remember Charlotte tossing it onto my cutting table, a triumphant grin on her face. We did it, Miri. A full-page feature. I dropped my shears and grabbed it, my heart pounding. There was a huge, gorgeous photo of Charlotte, looking poised and powerful in our viral tea dress. And then I read the article. It spoke of Charlotte's innate genius for draping, of her unique vision that is single-handedly reviving classic femininity. My name, Miriam, was mentioned once in passing as her business partner. I felt a cold prickle on my skin. It says it's your vision, I said, my voice small. Charlotte waved a dismissive hand, already moving on to her next thought. Oh, it's just Pierre, Miri, you know how they are. They need a single, compelling figurehead. Amuse. It's better for the brand. You know you're the magic behind it all. I know it. That's all that matters, right? She said it with such casual confidence that I felt foolish for even questioning it. She was right, wasn't she? I hated interviews. I stumbled over my words and felt my face flush. Charlotte was brilliant at them. It was for the good of the brand. For the good of us. So I nodded, pushed the hurt down, and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It was the first time my contribution was not just minimized but completely rewritten. I was no longer the architect. I was a helpful assistant. After that, the cracks started to appear faster. The brand's official social media, which Charlotte ran, started posting more and more photos of just her. Captions would read, "A quiet moment of inspiration before a new collection," showing Charlotte looking thoughtfully at one of my sketchbooks, which was always artfully left open to a particularly stunning design. My designs. My inspiration. Soon, industry people we'd meet at events would greet me with a polite, slightly confused smile. "Oh, you're the partner. Charlotte is just a force of nature, isn't she?" I became a shadow attached to her shining form, the silent, awkward girl in the background. Each time I would feel that same cold prickle of erasure, and each time Charlotte would have a perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable explanation. They just connect with me, Miri. I'm the storyteller. You hate this stuff anyway. And I did. I hated the schmoozing, the fake smiles, the air kisses. So I let myself believe her. I retreated further into my studio, my sanctuary, telling myself that the work was the only thing that mattered. The purity of the design. That was my truth, and no magazine article could take it away from me. The real earthquake, the one that shattered our entire world, came about 3 years into our success. We were on the cusp of becoming a major player. We had just secured a massive investment deal that would take us global. I was sketching a new collection, feeling a surge of creative energy I hadn't felt in months. Charlotte walked into the studio, her face glowing with an almost feverish excitement. She was holding a thick portfolio of mock-ups and branding documents. "Miri, you have to see this. This is it. This is the future." She spread the documents across my table, covering my sketches. Bold, sleek lettering stared up at me. It just said, "Charlotte." I stared at it, confused. "What is this?" "A new diffusion line." She laughed, a sound that was suddenly too loud, too bright for our quiet studio. "No, silly. This is the new C&M. We're rebranding. To be a true legacy brand, a global powerhouse, it needs a name. A face. Like Chanel. Or Prada. It needs to be me." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked from the bold, arrogant letters of her name to her expectant face, and for the first time, I saw her not as my friend but as a strategist. "No," I whispered. "No, it's C&M. It's always been C&M. It's us." Her smile tightened. The warmth in her eyes cooled into something hard and polished like marble. "Miri, be serious. This isn't a high school art project anymore. This is a multi-million-dollar corporation." BAM Design sounds small. Sounds like 2 girls in an apartment. Charlotte sounds like an empire. "But I'm not in that name," I said, my voice shaking. "You're erasing me. Completely." Her expression shifted to one of practiced patience, the kind one uses on a difficult child. "Don't be so dramatic. Nothing is changing for you. You'll still design. You'll still have your studio. This is just marketing. It's about perception. You are taking this way too personally." Taking it personally? My name, my identity, my entire life's work, and I was taking it personally? The argument that followed was the ugliest of my life. I accused her of being a thief. She accused me of being a naive, ungrateful artist who didn't understand the real world. She yelled that she was the one who had built this, who had sacrificed, who had put in the real work of shaking hands and building an empire while I was just doodling in a notebook. That was the word she used. Doodling. The word landed like a punch to my stomach, knocking the air and the fight out of me. All those years, all those sleepless nights, all that passion I had poured onto the page, it was just doodling to her. In that moment the friendship was over. I knew it. The love and trust one had felt for her curdled into something cold and bitter. The final blow came a week later. I had been nominated for a prestigious Rising Star Award in fashion. Or rather, the brand had. The nomination, when it was announced, was for Charlotte, the visionary designer behind the eponymous label. My name was nowhere. I wasn't invited to the ceremony. I saw photos online of Charlotte on the red carpet, holding the award, thanking her amazing team for their support. That was the snapping point. The next morning I walked into her gleaming new office, so different from our old studio, and I laid down an ultimatum. I wanted public credit as co-creative director. I wanted my initial back on the label. I wanted my existence to be acknowledged. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just empty and resolved. Charlotte listened, her face a mask of detached pity. She didn't argue. She simply leaned back in her plush leather chair and said, "I was afraid it would come to this." She slid a thick leather-bound folder across the desk. It was from her lawyers. It was a buyout agreement. She offered me a sum of money that, to the girl who once lived on instant noodles, seemed enormous. But I knew even then that it was a pittance, a tiny fraction of what the company we built together was worth. It was hush money. "You can't be serious," I whispered, staring at the document. "This is our company." "No, Miriam," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Legally it's my company. I handled the incorporation. I structured the investment deals. You were always just a consultant. A very, very valued one, of course." The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. She had been planning this for years. Every contract I had signed without reading, every time I'd said, "You handle it, Lottie, you're better at that stuff," she had been weaving a legal web around me. The agreement came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. If I took the money, I could never speak of my role in the creation of the brand. I would have to disappear. The alternative she laid out was a protracted, public and ruinously expensive legal battle against a corporation with infinitely deep pockets. A battle I would lose. I looked at her, the girl who I had shared every secret and every dream with, and I saw a complete stranger. A cold, calculating businesswoman who had seen my talent not as a gift to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited and, eventually, discarded. I signed the papers. My hand didn't even shake. I felt nothing at all. I walked out of that office, leaving my sketchbook, my designs, and my past life behind me. I was a ghost. Miriam, the designer, was dead. And Charlotte had been the one to sign the death certificate. The pain of it was a physical thing. It was a constant dull ache in my chest, a hollowness that seemed to echo with every breath. I would walk down the street in New York and see our dresses, her dresses, in shop windows, on billboards, on women laughing as they walked past me. Each sighting was a fresh stab of betrayal. My work was everywhere, but I was nowhere. I was invisible, erased from my own story. The buyout money sat in my bank account, feeling dirty and heavy like blood money. It was the price of my silence, the cost of my soul. I stayed in my new empty apartment for weeks, the blinds drawn, the silence screaming. I couldn't sketch. My hands felt alien, disconnected from my mind. What was the point of creating something if it could just be stolen, if my name could be so easily erased? Charlotte's star, meanwhile, was ascending at a meteoric rate. She was on talk shows, on the cover of Forbes, hailed as a feminist icon, a self-made titan of industry. She told our story, but she told it with me edited out. In her version, she was the lonely genius, sketching dresses in her tiny apartment, fighting her way to the top all by herself. It was a masterful performance, and the world gave her a standing ovation. The anger and the grief were a toxic cocktail inside me. I knew I couldn't stay in New York. The city itself felt like a monument to my failure, to my naive, broken heart. I had to disappear. I packed one suitcase, took the money, and bought a one-way ticket to a place where no one knew my name, a place where I could try to forget the ghost I had become. I chose Milan. Milan was not a gentle landing. It was a city that wore its beauty and its history with an intimidating elegance, and I felt like a clumsy, graceless fraud within its walls. I found a small, modest flat in a neighborhood far from the glamorous Quadrilatero della Moda, the city's fashion district. For the first few months I did nothing. I walked. I walked for hours every day, through winding cobblestone streets, past grand palazzos and hidden courtyards. I was an observer, a specter soaking in the details of a life that felt a million miles away from my own. I watched the old women gossiping on their balconies, the stylish businessmen zipping by on Vespas, the artisans working in their tiny, cluttered workshops. The city was a tapestry of craftsmanship, of history, of things made slowly and with intention. It was the antithesis of the fast, brutal world of fashion I had just escaped. My money was finite. The buyout, which had seemed so large in New York, felt smaller here with the exchange rate and the cost of living. A quiet panic began to set in. I was alone, adrift, and my savings were slowly dwindling. My healing, if you could call it that, began in the most unlikely of places. A tiny, dusty fabric shop in the Altarno district, a place known for its traditional artisans. The shop was called Tessuti d'Oro, Golden Textiles. It was crammed from floor to ceiling with bolts of silk, velvet, and brocade, many of them decades old. The air smelled of dust, lavender, and thyme. It was run by a man named Alessandro Bellini. He was in his late 70s, with hands that were gnarled and stained from a lifetime of working with dyes, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as a winter sky. He was a retired couturier, a legend from a bygone era before corporations and marketing departments had taken over fashion. I started going to the shop every day. I wouldn't buy anything, I couldn't afford to. I would just run my hands over the fabrics, feeling the weight of the silk, the plushness of the velvet. It was a way of reconnecting with the only part of myself I hadn't lost. Alessandro would watch me from behind his counter, his expression unreadable. I started carrying my sketchbook again, though I still couldn't bring myself to draw fashion. I drew the patterns in the cobblestones, the ironwork on a balcony, the face of a gargoyle on a nearby church. One rainy afternoon I was sitting on a small stool in the corner of the shop, sketching the intricate pattern of an old damask, when Alessandro shuffled over. He didn't speak. He just stood behind me looking over my shoulder. I was so used to being invisible that his presence was a jolt. My hand froze. "You have a good hand," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But your lines are afraid. They are hiding." He pointed a gnarled finger at my page. "You draw the dead things. The stone. The cloth. Why don't you draw the living?" I couldn't answer. The thought of drawing a dress, of designing again, felt like a betrayal of my own pain. It was too soon. It felt impossible. But I kept coming back to the shop, and slowly a strange, unspoken friendship formed between us. He would tell me stories of the old days, of fitting dresses for movie stars and princesses, of a time when fashion was about creating a unique piece of art for a single woman. He spoke of craftsmanship with a reverence I had almost forgotten existed. He never asked about my past, but I knew he saw it in my eyes, in the way I held myself, in the hesitant lines of my sketches. One day he placed a small, simple bolt of cream-colored silk on the counter. It was flawless, a perfect gazer silk that was both structured and light, notoriously difficult to work with. "This," he said, "is for you. Not a gift. A challenge. I want to see what those sad hands of yours can really do." I stared at the fabric. It was worth a fortune, more than a month's rent. I tried to refuse, but he was insistent. "The silk is sleeping," he said. "It is waiting for a reason to wake up. I think you are too." That night I took the silk back to my small apartment. I spread it out on my floor and it seemed to glow in the dim light. For the first time in over a year I felt a flicker. A tiny, fragile spark in the hollow space in my chest. I thought about my journey. The feeling of being erased, of being silenced, of being hidden away. I thought of a silkworm, spinning its cocoon in darkness, creating something exquisite and strong from its own essence, unseen by the world. And then I started to sketch. It wasn't doodling. It was a fever. I drew for days, not sleeping, barely eating. I poured all the pain, the betrayal, the anger, and the faint, flickering hope into a single design. It was a gown. It was severe and structured at the top, with a high, almost restrictive collar like armor. The bodice was intricately pleated and folded, like a chrysalis. But from the waist down, It exploded into a riot of soft, flowing layers, free and unrestrained. It was a story in a single dress. The story of a woman breaking free. I spent the next month creating it. I had no team, no assistants. It was just me, my old sewing machine, and the skills I had honed over a lifetime. I hand-stitched every pleat, every seam. My fingers bled. My back ached. But with every stitch I felt like I was sewing myself back together. I was reclaiming my craft, my identity, one thread at a time. When it was finished, I brought it to Alessandro. I dressed a mannequin in his shop and we stood back and looked at it. The silence was profound. The gown was more than a dress. It was a sculpture. It was a confession. Alessandro walked around it slowly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He reached out and touched one of the flowing layers of the skirt. "Ah," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There you are, Signorina. I was wondering when you would arrive." That was the moment my new life began. Alessandro, using his old, powerful connections, didn't try to get the dress into a magazine. He did something much smarter. He arranged a private viewing for 3 people. A famously reclusive Italian heiress, a highly influential but discreet fashion editor from Paris, and a powerful buyer for a secretive collective of the world's wealthiest women. They came to his dusty old shop and they saw the gown. They didn't ask who the designer was. They didn't care. They only cared about the work. The heiress bought the gown on the spot for a price that made me feel faint. The editor wrote a small coded piece in her publication about a new, anonymous masterwork emerging from Milan, a testament to pure artistry. The buyer placed an order for 5 more unique pieces. And so, Silkworm was born. The name felt right. It was about the anonymous, tireless work of creation. It was about spinning beauty in the dark. For the next 5 years I operated in complete secrecy. I used the money from those first sales to build a small atelier, hiring a handful of the best artisans in Milan. Seamstresses, embroiderers, weavers, all of whom were recommended by Alessandro and all of whom signed their own ironclad NDAs, not because of money, but out of a shared respect for the sanctity of the craft. We became a cult. A myth. Our pieces were never advertised. They were spoken of in whispers. To own a silkworm was the ultimate status symbol, not because it was expensive, but because it was impossible to get. It signified that you were in the know, that you had an appreciation for true art, not just a brand name. I lived frugally, pouring every cent back into the business, into sourcing the most exquisite materials, into paying my artisans what they were truly worth. My life was quiet, monastic, and deeply fulfilling. I had my work. I had the respect of my small team. I had Alessandro's gruff, unwavering support. It was enough. Meanwhile, I watched Charlotte's empire from a distance. As I had predicted, without my creative engine, the brand began to falter. The designs became derivative, chasing trends instead of setting them. The critics, once her biggest cheerleaders, started using words like stale, commercial, and uninspired. Sales began to dip. The press started to turn on her. And then came the ultimate, galling irony. In a desperate attempt to regain her credibility and associate herself with something authentic, Charlotte started talking about Silkworm in interviews. I remember reading the article online, my coffee going cold in my hand. "This mysterious designer, Silkworm, is exactly what the industry needs," she was quoted as saying. "Their work is pure art. I feel a real kinship with them. In fact, it's my personal mission to find this incredible talent and offer them my mentorship, to bring them into the light." My mentorship. Her light. The audacity of it, the colossal narcissistic arrogance, was breathtaking. She wanted to absorb my new identity just as she had absorbed my old one. She wanted to use my ghost to save her own crumbling kingdom. Alessandro saw the look on my face when I showed him the article. He nodded slowly. "The silkworm has made its cocoon strong," he said, his voice firm. "But a cocoon is not a home. It is a temporary place. It is time for the world to see the moth." And that was the moment we decided to do it. We would stage Silkworm's first ever runway show. It would be the closing event of Milan Fashion Week. The invitations would be the most exclusive in the world. We sent out only 100. They were not paper but small hand-embroidered pieces of silk, each one unique. The response was instantaneous and frenzied. The entire fashion world was in an uproar. Who was Silkworm? Would they finally reveal themselves? The buzz was deafening. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Charlotte would have to be there. Her entire reputation now depended on being seen at the center of whatever was important in fashion. I watched the drama unfold through industry blogs and gossip columns. Charlotte was pulling every string, calling in every favor, spending an astronomical sum of money through third-party agents to secure a ticket. She had no idea, of course, that the one person who could grant her a seat was me. And I made sure she got one. Front row center. Right where I could see her. The night of the show, as I stood backstage, I felt a strange, terrifying calm. It was the calm of a journey's end. I had spent years spinning my pain into beauty, my silence into strength. Charlotte thought she was coming to a fashion show to scout a new talent. He thought she was the hunter. She had no idea she was the one who had been led into a trap, a beautiful silken trap that I had been weaving for years. And I was finally ready to pull the strings. The air backstage was electric, a perfectly orchestrated storm of hushed whispers, the swish of silk and the scent of hairspray and anticipation. I moved through it all like the calm eye of the hurricane. My team, my small family of artisans, looked at me with a fierce, protective loyalty in their eyes. They knew parts of my story, but tonight the whole world would know. Alessandro stood beside me, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. His touch was grounding, a silent transfer of strength. "Breathe, Mia cara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You have already won. This is just the ceremony." He was right. The victory wasn't in the reveal, but in the creation. It was in every stitch of the 24 pieces that were about to walk the runway. I glanced at the monitor that showed a live feed of the audience. The room was dark, the guests silhouetted against the stark white runway. But the cameras were good. I could zoom in. I found her immediately. Charlotte. She was seated in the front row, exactly where I had placed her. She looked impeccable, of course. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She wore a dress from her own latest collection, a desperate attempt to look relevant. She had a practiced, eager smile on her face, the kind she used when she was about to close a deal. She was leaning over, whispering to the editor next to her, her expression radiating smug confidence. She thought she was at the center of the universe, that this event was, in some way, about her. My heart didn't pound with anger. It beat with a slow, steady and cold rhythm. The rhythm of a clock counting down to 0. 5 minutes, my stage manager called out. I took a deep breath and addressed my models, all 24 of them lined up, looking like an army of ethereal goddesses. "Tonight," I said, my voice clear and steady, "you are not just wearing dresses. You're telling a story. My story. Walk with strength. Walk with purpose. Make them feel it." They nodded, their eyes locked on mine, a silent pact passing between us. The lights in the main hall dimmed completely. A single haunting note from a solo cello cut through the silence. It was a sound full of melancholy and longing. It was the sound of my years in the wilderness. Then the first model stepped onto the runway. The collection was called Metamorphosis. It was divided into 3 acts. The first act, Cocoon, was what she walked out in now. The designs were restrictive, architectural. High, armored collars, fabrics like heavy, pewter-colored silk that was folded and pleated into intricate self-protective shells. The dresses were beautiful, but there was a sense of confinement, of something precious being held captive. I watched Charlotte on the monitor. Her smile faltered slightly. She tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The design language, it was familiar. The way the fabric was manipulated, the specific line of a shoulder. It was my handwriting, my design DNA. But it was darker, more complex than anything I had created for her. The music shifted. The cello was joined by a piano, the melody growing more hopeful, more questioning. This was the second act, Stirrings. The models walked out in pieces that were lighter, both in color and in spirit. The silhouettes began to loosen. Pale silvers, greens, and dusty blues replaced the somber grays. A sleeve on a blouse was unfurled like a nascent wing. A skirt was made of 1,000 tiny hand-cut silk petals that trembled as the model walked. It was the feeling of a prisoner beginning to remember the sun. On the monitor, Charlotte was no longer smiling. Her face was pale. Her hand, holding a champagne flute, was frozen halfway to her lips. The editor next to her was leaning in, whispering excitedly, but Charlotte didn't seem to hear. She was staring at the runway, her brow furrowed in deep, panicked concentration. He knew. He had to know. No one else in the world designed like this. Then came the finale. The music swelled into a powerful, soaring crescendo. Act 3, Emergence. The first model stepped out in a gown of such vibrant, impossible color it made the audience gasp. Ethereal dresses of gossamer silk in shades of sunrise, pinks, corals, golds, seemed to float down the runway. The construction was a marvel, a feat of engineering that looked weightless, effortless. These were not clothes for hiding. These were clothes for flying. The final piece, the showstopper, was the Phoenix gown. It was a masterpiece that had taken my best embroiderer and me 6 months to create. It was a column of fiery red silk, covered in thousands of hand-stitched flame-colored sequins and feathers, with a train that billowed out behind the model like a trail of fire and light. It was resurrection in the form of a dress. The entire room as one rose to its feet. The applause was a deafening roar. People were crying. Critics looked stunned, their professional composure shattered. And I looked at Charlotte. Her face had completely crumbled. The mask of the powerful Xiao was gone, replaced by the face of a woman who had just seen a ghost. A ghost wearing her stolen past, her stolen future, all of it transformed into something far more beautiful and powerful than she could ever have imagined. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a dawning, abject horror. She recognized my soul on that runway. And she knew what was coming next. Backstage, my team was embracing, tears streaming down their faces. But I was still. It wasn't over. Not yet. I had pre-recorded a voiceover. My own voice, calm and clear, filled the auditorium, silencing the applause. And now, the founder and creative director of Silkworm. Miriam. My name. Just my name. It echoed in the vast space. A single word that held the weight of a decade of silence. On the monitor, I saw the name detonate in Charlotte's mind. Her entire body flinched as if from a physical blow. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly white under the harsh runway lights. Her carefully constructed world, her entire identity, had just been vaporized. I took one last deep breath and stepped out from behind the curtain. I wasn't wearing an elaborate gown. I was wearing a simple, impeccably tailored black silk suit. My hair was pulled back. My face was bare of makeup. I was not a fantasy. I was a fact. I walked onto the runway into the blinding wall of flashing cameras. The applause started again, louder this time, mixed with shouts of brava. And my name. Miriam. Miriam. But I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at the critics. I didn't look at the cameras. I walked slowly, deliberately, my eyes fixed on one person and one person only. I walked towards Charlotte. Across the sea of faces, our eyes locked. And in that moment I saw it all in her expression. The shock, the denial, the dawning terror, and beneath it all, the gut-wrenching recognition of her own profound, life-altering mistake. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was a look of utter annihilation. She looked like she was watching her life flash before her eyes. I felt no triumph. I felt no vengeful glee. The anger that had fueled me for so long had burned away, leaving behind a clean, quiet, and profound sense of peace. I had not come here to destroy her. I had come here to reclaim myself. I reached the end of the runway, just feet from where she sat, frozen, a statue of ruin. I held her gaze for one long, silent moment. I gave a single, small, dignified nod. It was not a bow. It was an acknowledgement. A closing statement. Then I turned my back on her and walked away, the sound of my name echoing all around me. I left her there, in the front row of my triumph, a spectator to the life she had tried so hard to bury. The show was over. My new life had just begun. The moment I stepped back through the curtain, the serene calm I had maintained on the runway shattered, replaced by a wave of overwhelming emotion. My team surged forward, enveloping me in a crush of hugs and joyful, tearful shouts. Alessandro was the last to reach me. He didn't hug me. He simply took both of my hands in his gnarled fingers surprisingly strong. He looked into my eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "The moth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She is even more beautiful than I imagined." In that moment, surrounded by my loyal chosen family, I felt a validation so deep and so pure it eclipsed the roar of the crowd outside entirely. My phone, which I had left with my assistant, was going insane. It was vibrating non-stop, a frantic, buzzing insect. Hundreds of notifications were flooding the screen. News alerts, social media tags, text messages, and dozens of missed calls. A significant number of them were from Charlotte. I swiped them all away without a second glance. The story had exploded. Within minutes, every major fashion publication and news outlet in the world was running with it. The headlines were sensational, exactly as I knew they would be. The ghost of fashion, Miriam, the true genius behind Charlotte, revealed as Silkworm. The ultimate revenge dress. How a betrayed designer reclaimed her name. They dug up old articles, juxtaposing the early hopeful photos of C&M designs with the later, glossy photos of Charlotte, the solo visionary. The narrative was stark, simple, and utterly damning for her. The story I had told with my collection was so clear, so emotionally resonant, that no spin or PR statement could combat it. Charlotte was not just a fraud, she was a villain in a story of her own making. Her brand stock, which was already fragile, began to plummet in after-hours trading. I had no interest in the glittering afterparties. My team and I went to a small family-run trattoria in a quiet neighborhood, a place where no one cared about Fashion Week. We took over a long wooden table in the back and Alessandro ordered bottle after bottle of good, strong Barolo. We ate pasta and laughed, our voices loud and joyful in the cozy room. It was the celebration I had craved, not one of public adulation but of private, shared victory. For the first time in years I felt completely, utterly light. The weight of the secret I had carried, the burden of the injustice had been lifted. My peace, however, was briefly interrupted. As we were finishing our meal, my assistant's phone rang. It was the security guard I had hired for my private studio. "Signora," he said, his voice urgent. "There is a woman here. A Signora Charlotte. He is very insistent. She says she must speak with Miriam." I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course. She wouldn't let it go. She needed to control the narrative even now. "Let her in," I said quietly, much to Alessandro's disapproval. "But stay close. I will be there in 20 minutes. I knew I had to do this. This was the final thread I needed to cut. When I arrived at the studio, the space was silent. The phoenix gown stood on its mannequin in the center of the room, shimmering under a single spotlight. Charlotte was standing in front of it, her back to me. When she turned around, I was shocked. The impeccable, powerful woman from the runway was gone. Her face was blotchy, her mascara running in black tracks down her cheeks. Her hair was disheveled. She looked broken. "Miri," she whispered, her voice raw. How could you do this to me?" The question was so perfectly, so predictably her. Even now, she saw herself as the victim. "How could I do what, Charlotte?" I asked, my voice even and calm. "Stage a fashion show? Put my name on my own work? These are things you've been doing for years." Her face contorted in a mask of rage and self-pity. "You did it to destroy me. You planned this whole thing just to ruin my life." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "The strange thing was, it was the truth. This was never about you. Not really. This was about me. This was about me remembering who I was." "Your ruin," I said, gesturing around the studio at the collection, at the evidence of my years of hard work, "is just a consequence of your own choices. You built your empire on a lie, Charlotte. Sooner or later, lies collapse." She started to cry then, ugly, heaving sobs. She tried to respin the past, to gaslight me one last time. But we were a team. I made us famous. I did the hard work you hated. I made you who you are. I felt a wave of pity for her, so lost in her own delusions. "No, Charlotte," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "We were friends. And then you made a business decision. You decided my name, my contribution, my very existence, was worth less than a branding strategy. You erased me. Tonight I just drew myself back in." She had no answer to that. She just stood there, weeping, stripped of all her power and excuses. I looked at her, this stranger who had once been my other half, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty space where our friendship used to be. "I think you should go now," I said softly. I nodded to the security guard, who stepped forward and gently but firmly escorted her out of the studio, out of my life for the last time. As the door closed behind her, I turned back to the phoenix gown. It seemed to glow with an inner fire. I was finally free. A year passed. A year of whirlwind change, but on my own terms. Silkworm became the most talked about couture house in the world. Lucrative offers poured in from massive conglomerates wanting to buy us, to create diffusion lines, to plaster the Silkworm name on handbags and perfumes. I turned them all down. I had not fought so hard to reclaim my name only to sell it to the highest bidder. Silkworm remained what it was always meant to be: a small, exclusive atelier dedicated to artistry and craftsmanship. We moved to a beautiful new studio in a renovated villa on the outskirts of Milan, with a garden where I could sketch in the sun. My life was quiet, focused, and deeply, profoundly happy. As for Charlotte, her fall was as swift and as spectacular as her rise. Her brand, built on the fragile foundation of her stolen persona, collapsed under the weight of the scandal. Her investors pulled out, her stock became worthless, and she was forced to sell the company for parts. She disappeared from public life completely. The tabloids occasionally ran grainy photos of her in some distant, sunny location, looking tired and anonymous. The Queen had been deposed not by a rival but by the truth. About 6 months after the show, a letter arrived at my studio. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Charlotte. It was a long, rambling, and deeply self-pitying letter. But buried within the pages of excuses and blame, there was a single, startling sentence. "I look at the dresses we made, the early ones, and then I look at what I made without you," she wrote. "And I see the truth. The magic was always you. I was just the frame for your picture. I am so sorry I broke the glass." I read the letter, and for the first time I felt a flicker of the old sadness, a pang of grief for the girl I used to love, the friend I had lost so long ago. It was a clumsy, imperfect apology, but it was an apology nonetheless. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never replied. There was nothing left to say. Her chapter in my story was over. Forgiveness was a complex thing, but peace was simple. And I had found my peace. So that's my story. It's a story about fashion, yes, but it's really about identity. It's about how easily a person can be erased, and the incredible strength it takes to write yourself back into existence. I learned that being underestimated, being made invisible, can become a strange kind of superpower. It gave me the darkness and the silence I needed to create something true, something that was entirely my own. The world can take your name, your work, your credit, but it can never take your talent. That is yours alone. That is the thread you use to weave your way back. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. It means the world to me to be able to share it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight to have your voice heard or your work recognized? What would you have done in my situation? Share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them and build a community where we can all feel seen. And please, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity. Thank you again for joining me. I wish you all the strength in the world. Remember, sometimes the quietest work ends up making the loudest and most beautiful impact of all.